From London, this is the Standard Podcast, and I'm Mark Blunden. It can be revealed on Tuesday that the victim of a police shooting allegedly tried to murder a gang rival in a nightclub gun attack. Chris Kaba, 24, was described as a core member of the Brixton Hill-based 67 gang, which is entrenched in London's drill rap scene and linked to a series of violent attacks and murders. On Monday, Met Police firearms officer Martyn Blake was found not guilty by an Old Bailey jury of murdering Kaba during an armed car stop in Streatham in September 2022. Following the lifting of reporting restrictions by the judge, Mr. Justice Goss, it also emerged Kaba was allegedly found to have had gunshot residue on his sleeve and a balaclava in his pocket on the night he was killed by Blake, which it was suggested was evidence he had been involved in a second shooting the previous night. Kaba's previous convictions included being jailed for possession of an imitation firearm and knife, and he was subject to a domestic violence order preventing him from contacting the mother of his unborn child. The London Standard's courts correspondent Tristan Kirk has been covering the case and was at the verdict, after which Kaba's family described feeling a deep pain of injustice. And Tristan joins us from inside the Old Bailey now. Could you give us an overview of what was revealed today in court following the lifting of reporting restrictions?
Well, on Monday, Martyn Blake, Metropolitan Police Officer, was cleared of the murder of Chris Kaba in a hard stop by armed police in Streatham, 2022. Today, on Tuesday at the Old Bailey, the judge who oversaw that trial lifted reporting restrictions, which meant that the media could report for the first time in full the background to Chris Kaba himself, his criminal connections, his convictions, and the accusations that were levelled at him involving shootings just before he himself was killed.
What do you feel is significant in terms of what's been revealed about Chris Kaba's character and his endeavours, shall we say, prior to this incident?
Well, in the days before he was shot dead, Chris Kaba was linked to two separate shootings. The first one was 5 days before he died, and he was the prime suspect in a shooting in a nightclub where a member of a rival gang to the one that Kaba was associated with was shot twice in the legs, once inside the nightclub across the dance floor, and the second time in the street as he was trying to get away. Now, Kaba was caught on camera apparently carrying out this shooting. He would have stood trial for this incident if he'd still been alive. And the second thing that we can now report today is that when he was shot dead by police, Chris Kaba had gun residue on his clothing, and he is suspected of being involved in a shooting that happened the day before he was killed by the police marksman. So what's been revealed today is that Chris Kaba was far from an innocent member of the public. He was, in fact, a committed member of a gang, the 67 gang, which is based in and around Brixton Hill. And he had links to significant incidents of gun crime just before he was killed. The other thing that we can report today is his past convictions involving for possession of weapons, for possession in the past of a firearm, for a fray when he was a youth. This puts a different perspective on the case. It doesn't change the narrative entirely, but it does put a different perspective on the environment that the police were operating in at the time that Martyn Blake shot dead Chris Kaba.
What happens now for Martyn Blake, and how would you describe the atmosphere yesterday as the not guilty verdict was read?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tense situation when the not guilty verdict came down. The family were there and they were understandably devastated by the verdict and by what they're still going through in terms of the loss of their family member who was just on the cusp of becoming a father. The police responded quite strongly by supporting their man. Martyn Blake's suspension was almost immediately lifted, and the Met came out and said that they think the system is broken. The Justice Secretary has weighed in and said that she understands the concern around these kind of cases. The CPS was forced to justify why they brought the case in the first place, and the Met Federation just now have weighed in to say that this trial should never have taken place, and that the firearms officers that work for the Met are in a difficult position. They've got an important role, and they should not be held to account in this way with a full criminal trial. What we do know is that there will be an inquest for Chris Kaba to go over largely the same kind of ground, but an inquest is slightly different to a criminal trial, and it can come to different conclusions about how and when someone died, more specific. Martyn Blake is now free to potentially return to duties. However, he could also face a misconduct hearing over his actions on that day. That's something that the IOPC, the independent watchdog, still has to decide.
Do we know anything about Chris Kaba's family's plans in terms of future campaigning? Obviously a really horrible day for them yesterday.
Absolutely horrible day. I mean, the family are determined to continue to pursue justice for Chris Kaba in whatever avenue that they possibly can. The first one that's naturally going to come up, I think, is the inquest, where a coroner will separately pore over the details of the death and could potentially come to conclusions about how the police run their operations when firearms are involved and how information is shared. The coroner could come to different conclusions that were not involved in a criminal trial for murder. That was a simple guilty or not guilty.